Video games and movies, a combination most of us hoped would go together like cheese and toast. Instead, it's typically more like cheese and Haribo. Still, they keep trying, and we can't think of a better way to celebrate their noble attempts than by making you suffer with us through every last one of them.
Before we begin, let's go over the rules. For starters, we're grouping franchises together. Reboots get entries of their own, but sequels will share entries with the films or films that preceded them. We know that might not be a popular choice, but the list is long enough as it is, and if we didn't group them together, it would be almost entirely comprised of Pikachu and Mila Jovovich. No matter how we slice it though, we will still end up with a lot of Uwe Boll. You have been warned.
Also, we will only be considering theatrical releases, so you won't see any made-for-TV movies or direct-to-video movies. And though it probably goes without saying, we will not be looking at films about video games, such as King of Kong or The Wizard, or films based on fictional games, such as Wreck-It Ralph or Tron. The films are ranked primarily in terms of critical reception, fan response, and box office intake, but we employed some common sense as well. Only a bit. So don't worry, you'll still have plenty of opportunity to tell us how wrong we are.
Additionally, prepare to hear a lot of the British pronunciation of Rotten Tomatoes, rather than Rotten Tomatoes. We hope you'll forgive us. And finally, a rule you've all been waiting for, this is the first worst to best list that includes mobile games. No, please hold your applause.
Let's rank 'em. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and here is every video game movie ranked from worst to best.
Number 75, Tekken, 2010. This movie was the result of filmmakers seeing that through a freak legal loophole, the Tekken license was available for free. They decided on a lark to scoop it up and see just how bad a film they could make without inciting a riot. At least, we hope that's what happened. It would be far too upsetting to believe that anyone involved tried to make this movie any good. Tekken was released direct to video in most markets, but it got a theatrical release in Japan and the Philippines, which was somehow not interpreted as an act of war. It does hold an impressive 0% on Rotten Tomatoes though, and that's an achievement in itself. Number 74, Dead Trigger, 2019. You may or may not remember Dead Trigger. In 2012, it was a decent first-person shooter for mobile phones. It was hardly a cultural phenomenon, but you can't fault film studios for gambling on the then nascent mobile gaming market. So when Dead Trigger was made into a movie in, wait, this can't be right, 2019. Someone made a decade-old mobile game into a movie last year. What? How? I'm speechless. Well, I'm not, but I can't curse on this channel. Anyway, I'd love to tell you what people thought, but neither Rotten Tomatoes nor Metacritic have any critical reviews at all, proving that you can't even pay people to watch this. Number 73, Alone in the Dark, 2005, and Alone in the Dark 2, 2008. This list is almost exclusively comprised of awful films. It therefore takes a hell of a lot for one film to particularly stand out as dreadful, but Alone in the Dark is up to the task. It averaged 1% on Rotten Tomatoes, which, if we're being honest with ourselves, is far too generous. Director Uwe Boll took the original script, an atmospheric thriller, and reworked it into a mindless action film. It got a sequel, but if you really want to watch an Alone in the Dark movie, watch this one from 1982. The title is coincidental, but it has just as much in common with the games as Boll's films do. Number 72, Double Dragon, 1994. The classic video game Double Dragon was a sci-fi fantasy romp through post-apocalyptic Los Angeles in search of a magical medallion, starring a farting gonad in a bib. I mean, it wasn't. It was just a game about beating up the guy who punched your girlfriend in the duodenum, but don't tell the people who made this film. We're sure they worked very hard on it and should be very proud of what they achieved. For instance, did you know that there were 0 reported on-set fatalities? Excellent work, Double Dragon. The movie was critically panned, which is something we think you could probably have worked out on your own. Number 71, House of the Dead, 2003. Uwe Boll is at his Uwe Bolliest in House of the Dead, a film based on a light gun game, which means it should have pleased fans just by having firearms in it, and yet, here we are. House of the Dead holds a score of 3% on Rotten Tomatoes, which surely puts it among Boll's most beloved films. one of the few positive reviews came from IGN shortly after its reviewer suffered a severe head injury. They praise it for doing an incredibly decent job with the source material, which makes me wonder if they have any idea what either the word incredibly or decent means. Number 70. In the Name of the King, a Dungeon Siege Tale, 2008. Dungeon Siege is... You know what, it doesn't matter. This is another Uwe Boll film, which means it has nothing to do with the games, has no redeeming qualities, and has a single-digit score on Rotten Tomatoes. The Dungeon Siege name itself is irrelevant. This might as well be based on Miss Pac-Man. It's about a group of terrible actors and a few good ones who desperately need paychecks. They speak words from a script they were handed 5 seconds before someone turned the cameras on. Our heroes contend with poor effects, plot contrivances, and lots of padding. The story continues in 2 direct-to-video sequels, because of course it does. Number 69. Nice. BLOODRAYNE, 2006. Remember the game BLOODRAYNE? Maybe not, it was alright, but there's been no shortage of much better games since its release in 2002. Remember the movie? Definitely not, because if you went to see it, you surely had that memory surgically removed. The film was an incomprehensible, idiotic flop, which is just a longer way of saying it was directed by Uwe Boll. BLOODRAYNE earned back less than 15% of its budget, which might seem like a small number until you see its 4% rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Its first direct-to-video sequel was released with a free copy of BLOODRAYNE 2. Even the distributors knew nobody would buy that movie on its own. Number 68. Fatal Fury, the Motion Picture, 1994. For a genre that doesn't lend itself well to movies, there sure have been a lot of adaptations of one-on-one fighting games. In fact, there have been a fair few Fatal Fury movies as well, though this was the only one to secure a theatrical release. Did it deserve one? Well, about as much as any movie about people hitting each other deserves one. Critics were pleased with the animation and the fans enjoyed cameos from the series' wider cast of characters, but the storyline, focusing on an irrelevant, globe-trotting artifact hunt, pleased nobody. If only other kinds of video games existed, say action or adventure games, then maybe the story would have fit. Number 67. Far Cry, 2008. Far Cry is a fine example of virtuoso director Uwe Boll putting his inimitable artistic stamp upon another franchise that is forever elevated for having him involved. Wait, sorry, I misread that. Far Cry is yet another example of critical nightmare director Uwe Boll leaving his stink all over something we used to like. Making back less than 3% of its budget, Far Cry managed to disappoint fans of video games, fans of movies, and fans of being alive. Ubisoft has expressed interest in bringing Far Cry to the big screen again though. They've even revealed that they will give the project to a director far superior in every way, that being anyone who is not Uwe Boll. Number 66. AONI, 2017. A freeware horror game popularized on YouTube by people who enjoy yelling, AONI took on an impressive life of its own. It has been adapted into a series of anime shorts, a manga, and junior novels for children who don't wish to sleep anymore. It was also adapted into both live action and animated films. The animated film moves the story from a mansion into a school, possibly to tap into the popularity of Corpse Party. It should have tapped into that game's writing quality as well, because nothing in this barely 1 hour long movie is worth enduring. Fortunately, the live action films are better. Unfortunately, you won't have to wait long to hear about them. Number 65. Street Fighter, The Legend of CHUN-LI, 2009. With The Legend of CHUN-LI, the filmmakers decided to outdo the previous attempt at a live-action Street Fighter film in every way. They succeeded in outdoing it in terms of negative reception. The Legend of CHUN-LI sits at a score of 5% on Rotten Tomatoes, making the other film's 11% seem like a cause for global celebration. To this film's credit, it can't be easy to adapt a video game in which people punch each other until one of them dies, and focusing on the personal story of one single fighter is probably the best way to go about doing so. To this film's discredit, everything else. Number 64. Postal, 2007. Uwe Boll's Postal is the lowest grossing movie on this list, though thanks to Dead Trigger it only holds that title by around $5,000. Taking its inspiration mainly from the game Postal 2, Boll adheres closely to the franchise's spirit of obnoxious, grating nonsense. The film opens with an extended comedy routine between 2 Al-Qaeda terrorists on the morning of September 11th. Yes, Really, and ends with Osama bin Laden and George W. Bush frolicking in a field. Yes, really. Bol attempted to crowdfund a sequel in which we assume Adolf Hitler and Barack Obama travel through time to assassinate Archduke Ferdinand, but received pledges in an amount that almost certainly wouldn't cover the cost of your car. Number 63. Monster Strike the Movie, 2016, and Monster Strike the Movie Sora no Kanata, 2018. Can you guess the highest grossing mobile app of all time? Of course you can. We wouldn't have posed the question in this entry if it weren't Monster Strike. The game's fanbase in Japan is huge. Unfortunately, the English language web is almost devoid of information about Monster Strike the Movie and its sequel. There aren't even many reviews. The most informative one we found was on Letterboxd, and we can reproduce it here in its entirety. Though it's a classic story, it tells us the bond of people. That's it. Honestly, even if I had been able to watch the films myself, I doubt I could have put it any better. Number 62. Legend of the Ancient Sword, 2018. Gaijin, a series of Chinese RPGs, has drawn comparisons to Dragon Age. I haven't played them and therefore can't comment. I have yet to learn Chinese, but that certainly suggests that the games are held in decent regard. Legend of the Ancient Sword, based on Gaijin 2, was released during Golden Week, which brings with it a flurry of media attention. And yet, Legend of the Ancient Sword bombed, sparking derision from the fanbase who probably, wanted it to be good. The movie immediately became one of the Chinese film industry's most notorious flops, right down there with Lobster Cop, which I promise I have not made up. Number 61. Wing Commander, 1999. From the first game's release in 1990, it was clear that Wing Commander was drawing heavy inspiration from sci-fi cinema. It wasn't until Wing Commander 3, though, that the technology to actually insert filmed scenes into the games became realistic. That game features live-action cutscenes starring huge names such as Mark Hamill and Malcolm McDowell. It was a smart idea. There must have been some very intelligent, talented people on that design team, all of which makes it surprising that when Wing Commander became a silver screen space opera of its own, it was utter rubbish. Reportedly, this was due to a last-minute script rewrite. Maybe the real problem, though, is that it wasn't rewritten enough. Number 60. Aoni, 2014, and Aoni Ver 2.0, 2015. Aoni wasn't just adapted into a live-action film, it was adapted into a live-action film twice in the span of 2 years, with the same group of characters played by different actors. They even have near-identical posters. Each received middling reviews. They're in Japanese, so we can't read them, but critics on YouTube, the very platform that gave Aoni such massive exposure to begin with, certainly weren't pleased. The majority of their criticism went towards the acting, the monster designs, and in the case of the first film, an ending that negates everything that preceded it. Wasting your time watching these? That's the real horror. Number 59. Aikatsu the Movie, 2014. Aikatsu Music Awards Minna de Show O MoraimaSHOW, 2015, so sorry. And Aikatsu the Targeted Magical Aikatsu Card, 2016. If you haven't spent much time in Japanese arcades, you may not be familiar with Aikatsu, and I haven't spent much time in Japanese arcades. Not that I think I'm the target audience for this game, which revolves around scanning actual collectible cards to help digital idols compete in various auditions and events. Several games were released for the 3DS, but those were Japan only. Ditto the anime series and movies. That's probably fine, as critics described the films as feeling like little more than long-form adverts for the cards. Is that an unfair assessment? I think we can all agree I am not qualified to answer that question in any way. Number 58. Street Fighter, 1994. Many games have become movies, but Street Fighter is one of the very few games that became a movie that then became a game. What's more, it became a really bad game. Was it as bad as the film? Could either answer be considered a positive one? Critic Leonard Maltin said the movie should have been titled 400 Funerals and No Sex. If anyone has any clue what he meant by that, please tell us in the comments. One common bit of misinformation is that Street Fighter marked the final film appearance of Raul Julia. In truth, Julia appeared in Down Came a Blackbird 1 year later. Is it good? Well, could it be worse? Number 57. KINGSGLAVE, Final Fantasy XV, 2016. Final Fantasy XV was released in 2016, though Square Enix spent the following few years actually finishing it, as content originally planned for the game was developed separately as DLC. KINGSGLAVE also consists of material that was originally intended for the game, but realizing nobody would buy DLC that was just a longer introductory cutscene, the developers sold it as a movie instead, offering absolutely nothing to those who hadn't played Final Fantasy XV and offering very little to those who had. Even those who enjoyed had to wonder why it existed. It scored only 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, so maybe Square Enix will consider putting Final Fantasy XVI's opening cinematic on the disc instead. Number 56. ONECHANBARA Bikini Samurai Squad, 2008. With a subtitle like Bikini Samurai Squad, there's only so much I can add. I will at least say that the film is based on the ONECHANBARA games, which translates as Sword Fighting Big Sister. Several of the games have seen Western releases, but its main audience remains in Japan. I wish they'd kept the movies to themselves too. It and its sequel, with the equally evocative subtitle Bikini Zombie Slayers, were criticised for their writing, directing, and special effects, which managed to be both poorly done and completely unnecessary. The main character's casting was also criticised, but somehow I doubt the film would have improved much if she was any good.
Number 55. Oh, a nice big one for me to start. SIA 2011, SIA 2 2012, SIA 3 Heroes Alliance 2013, SIA 4 2014, and SIA 5 Rise of Thunder 2015. Yeah, we're gonna include SIA in this list. It's not as though we'll ever have another chance to cover it in any other video. SIA is a science fiction themed social network for Chinese youths with collection and battle elements, and therefore we're counting it as a game. Comparisons have been made to Pokemon, which is certainly not coincidental. China went without localized Pokemon games until Sun and Moon in 2016, so there was definitely room for something else to fill the void. It's even gotten 5 movies so far, and the fact that the game is online means it could conceivably be updated for generations to come. SIA may have begun life as a knockoff, but it's a knockoff with a purpose. Number 54. Super Mario Bros. 1993. When Super Mario Bros. Was released in 1985, it took the world by storm. It made lifelong fans out of countless gamers around the world, and immediately asserted itself as one of the most important titles in the medium. But there was one question on the lips of kids everywhere. Why am I not looking at Bob Hoskins? Enter the very first live-action film based on a video game. It's Mario pretty much in name only, but a Bob-omb does waddle around for a bit, so that's good. In a way though, the film was just as influential as the game on which it was based. At the very least, it influenced decades of video game adaptations to be unwatchably bad. Number 53. Fate/Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works 2010. Released in 2004, the visual novel Fate/Stay Night, is that how it's pronounced? Became an immediate sensation, leading to spin-offs, retellings, adaptations, and even games in completely different genres. The fact that it was adapted to a film then is not surprising, nor is the fact that it could not possibly live up to the expectations. The visual novel had too much content to fit in a single movie. The script ran to over 1,000 pages compared to around 120 for most films of similar lengths, and unfortunately it focused on a single arc from the visual novel rather than the entire story. It was necessary, but it left fans completely disappointed and non-fans totally confused. Not an ideal outcome, really. Number 52. Dragon Age Dawn of the Seeker 2012. RPGs almost certainly offer the sturdiest frameworks for cinematic adaptations. Their strong emphases on narrative, characterization, and setting should give filmmakers an easy advantage. What movies cannot capture so easily, however, is the element of choice that defines many RPGs. So what did Dawn of the Seeker do to address that deficiency? Not much, really. Basing the film around recurring character Cassandra Pendergast was a wise decision, and indeed the character's portrayal was almost uniformly praised by critics, but just about everything else was divisive, from the film's predictable fantasy structure to its style of animation. Robbed of a chance to leave one's imprint on the proceedings, Dragon Age revealed itself as being quite disposable, really. Number 51. Ratchet & Clank 2016. Like Street Fighter, Ratchet & Clank was a game that became a movie that became a game. Unlike Street Fighter though, Ratchet & Clank didn't get substantially worse at every step in the process. In fact, Ratchet & Clank the movie the game holds a respectable 85% on Metacritic compared to Street Fighter the movie the game, which holds nothing but contempt for all who gaze upon it. The Ratchet film itself though wasn't received all that well, released a whopping 14 years after the game on which it was based, and 12 years after the last game in the series that was worth playing. Better late than never? Well, with a 22% average on Rotten Tomatoes, maybe not. Number 50, Silent Hill 2006 and Silent Hill Revelation 2012. Silent Hill games are really about their protagonists, with the town ideally being the setting of the story rather than the focus. What matters is what the characters learn about themselves and the personal demons they are forced to confront, not what the town really is or how it got to be that way. The two Silent Hill movies struggle to understand this though. Each of them toys to some extent with the actual characterization, but their overarching theme is little more than this town is hell and hell sure does suck. And that's unfortunate. At its best, the Silent Hill game series told psychological horror stories that put many great films to shame. Its own actual movies then deserved to do that too, but sadly they just didn't. Number 49, Running Boy, Star Soldier no Himitsu, 1986. We mentioned earlier that Super Mario Bros. Was the first video game to be adapted into a live-action film. Would you believe then that it was also the first one to be adapted into an animated film? Well, only believe it halfway, because it's actually tied with Running Boy Star Soldier no Himitsu, released the very same day. God, you know how it feels. You wait all day for a bus, then two turn up at once, and they're both pretty naff animated buses. Kind of lost control of the metaphor there, but the point is, Hudson Soft made a game called Star Soldier, Toho turned it into a movie, and it bombed. Moving on. Number 48, Hitman Agent 47, 2015. Wait, this isn't that terrible movie based on Hitman, is it? Oh no, don't worry, this is a totally different movie released 8 years later that was somehow even worse. The Hitman games earned their fans through creative design that turned every death into a symphony of planning, execution, and reaction. There was a genuine elegance to the violence that elevated Agent 47's contracts into deadly works of performance art. Not least, it was always possible to get in and out completely undetected, as a silent assassin, if you will. The movie adaptations, however, seem to think that 47 is just a bald guy with a barcode and a very loud gun. Failing to hit even double digits on Rotten Tomatoes, the best thing any critics seem to be able to say about watching Hitman Agent 47 is that they were allowed to go home afterwards. Number 47, Sakura Wars the Movie, 2001. Sakura Wars was one of Sega's last major IPs before the company stopped manufacturing its own hardware. It made its original home on the Saturn and then moved to the Dreamcast. The final game, at least prior to its 2019 reboot, was appropriately named So Long, My Love. The film, set between the events of the two Dreamcast games, was well received for its music and animation. That's hardly surprising, as the game's composer and animators were retained for the film. Strong criticism was levelled at the storyline though, and its lack of appeal for general audiences, but it was at least one more canon installment of a series that fans knew was fading fast. So long, my love, indeed. Number 46, oh boy, here we go. Higurashi no Naku Koroni 2008 and Higurashi no Naku Koroni Chikai 2009. Translating into the genuinely lovely English title, When the Evening Cicadas Cry, Higurashi no Naku Koroni is one of several visual novels on this list. Whereas the other visual novels got animated adaptations though, this one and its sequel went the live-action route. It's a strange decision, but it may have worked to the film's benefit, actually. The anime adaptation, for instance, drew criticism for its cutesy characters softening the impact of the violence and horror. The live-action films, by contrast, represent it more realistically and effectively. They still feel pretty basic by J-horror standards, but they might be worth checking out if you prefer to see your murderous anime girls in the flesh. Number 45. Tekken Blood Vengeance, 2011. The previous entry is a bit of an exception to the rule that animated video game films are generally miles better than their live-action counterparts. We wouldn't necessarily have expected that going into this list, but looking at those live-action counterparts, we realise it couldn't possibly be otherwise. In Tekken's case, its live-action film was described by one critic as being like the producers and writers have no idea who these characters are and had no intention of giving a crap. Blood Vengeance is no masterpiece, but at least it understands the smooth, impressive fighting that gave the games their appeal. The CGI film is heavy on spectacle and won't be remembered for its story, but it gave fans something that was recognisably Tekken. God, what a concept. Number 44. Hitman 2007. Oh, it should really not be this difficult to make a good film based on Hitman. Just shove Agent 47 into an interesting environment and have him take down his target through a combination of cleverness, foresight, and flamingo costumes. You could either embrace the corniness and include all of his wildest killing methods from the series, or lean into the seriousness and turn one mission into a 90-minute masterpiece of tension and release. Or you could just make a mindless action movie padded with footage from a failed TV show, I guess. Timothy Olyphant has gone on record saying he only took the lead role in this film to pay for a house. So if nothing more, I guess we can at least be glad that the existence of this thing means Timothy Olyphant isn't homeless. Hooray. Number 43. NINOKUNI, 2019. The NINOKUNI games famously featured animation by the legendary Studio Ghibli, known for creating some of the most beautiful, memorable, and important animated films in history. So when it came time for NINOKUNI to become a movie of its own, the filmmakers went with someone cheaper. Whether or not that was the reason for the film's difficulties at the Japanese box office, we can't say, but it certainly didn't help. NINOKUNI is not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination, but it does feel more inspired by the series than an official entry. Without the characters, story, or animation of the games, what was meant to be the appeal here? Number 42. Max Payne, 2008. Look, we expect these movies to deviate a little bit from the games. What we don't expect, though, is for one to be so monumentally mishandled that one of the game's developers issues a statement to disown it. But Scott Miller of 3D Realms did just that. Critics were even more critical. This weirdly demon-heavy film sits at a dismal 16% on Rotten Tomatoes. Then again, Mark Wahlberg did receive a high-profile nomination for his performance in the title role. Alright, yes, it was a Razzie, but beggars can't be choosers. Let's just say about this movie that Max Payne is both the title of the film and also the feeling you get from watching it. There, now you don't have to make that joke in the comments. Next, please. Number 41. Forbidden Siren, 2006. A Japanese horror game being adapted into a film is by no means a rarity, as this list demonstrates. What is a rarity, however, is one of those games having its film adaptation released on the same day as the game. The 9th of February 2006 saw both the release of Forbidden Siren 2, the game, and Forbidden Siren, the movie, which, despite the title not having a 2 in it, was indeed an adaptation of that sequel game. This was presumably meant to expose the game series to a different audience, or to build Forbidden Siren into a film series in its own right, but neither actually happened. The game series saw only one more entry, and the film never got a sequel. Truly the Forbidden Siren. Number 40. ROCO Kingdom The Desire of Dragon, 2013, ROCO Kingdom 2, 2013, ROCO Kingdom 3, 2014, and ROCO Kingdom 4, 2015. ROCO Kingdom may not be a name you're familiar with, but in China it's an extremely popular MMORPG. It's so popular in fact that it wasn't just adapted into a film, but a series of 4 films, not to mention a television series and a number of books. Not living in China, I can't pretend to know much about it, but it seems to be primarily designed for young children, I think. Sorry if you're not a young child and you like ROCO Kingdom. The game itself is often compared to Pokemon, with its focus on adorable little elemental critters. That alone may explain the amount of adaptations and tie-in material. If you're going to pull inspiration from Pokemon, don't overlook those sweet multimedia revenue streams. Ka-ching. Number 39, Dragon's Nest Warrior's Dawn 2014 and Dragon's Nest 2 Throne of Elves 2016. South Korean MMORPG Dragon Nest became a hit thanks to a years-long open beta and positive word of mouth. It was translated and localized many times over until it had more than 200 million active players. But when the inevitable attempt at a motion picture was made, it didn't even happen in South Korea. Instead, China had a go, so large was the game's following in that market. It didn't quite make back its budget, unfortunately, but it was well enough received that it got an English language release and a sequel, both of which were praised for their voice casts. The game remains popular to this day, so it's very possible we haven't seen the last of the films. Number 38, Doom 2005. Doom somehow seems like both the best and worst idea for a video game movie. Best because most people have played Doom and everyone who did loved it. Worst because, well, look at it. Not much in the way of a story, is there? Granted, Doom 3 brought a stronger narrative to the franchise, but Doom 3 wasn't what most fans pictured when thinking of the series. It's also not what the filmmakers seem to be going for, emphasizing action over atmosphere. Roger Ebert put it best: Doom is like some kid came over and is using your computer and won't let you play. The movie failed to recoup its budget, and a second attempt at a Doom film went directly to video. Number 37, DOA Dead or Alive 2006. It's sometimes difficult to remember that Dead or Alive is a genuinely good series of fighting games. However, that's Dead or Alive's own fault, of course, with the series never being reluctant to draw attention to its female characters' bodies, above all else. This is the series that popularised jiggle physics, after all, and gave us spin-offs that were specifically designed to titillate. The film is exactly as intelligent as anyone expected it to be, but not nearly as much fun. And lo, it only made back about a quarter of its budget. Now, we aren't saying a Dead or Alive extreme beach volleyball movie would have been a better idea, but we're pretty sure it would have made much more money. Yeah, you know who you are. Number 36, Tales of Vesperia: The First Strike, 2009. The Tales series by Namco Bandai, or Bandai Namco if you want to get serious about this, is known for engaging stories, well-defined characters, and enchanting settings. Basically, it's known for everything you'd expect from a good fantasy film, and a good fantasy film is what it got with The First Strike. Serving as a prequel to Tales of Vesperia might be the film's only serious misstep. A standalone story would have likely brought in a much bigger audience, and maybe also drawn that audience to the games themselves. That aside though, the animation is great, the music was well received, and both the Eastern and Western voice casts were praised for their performances. If only this movie wasn't tied to one specific game, maybe more people would have watched it.
Number 35. Mortal Kombat 1995 and Mortal Kombat Annihilation 1997. Is there enough story in a game about colour-coded fighters ripping each other's heads off for a movie? Friend, there's enough for an entire trilogy. That was the plan anyway. The first film, directed by a pre-Resident Evil Paul W.S. Anderson, made $122 million on a budget of $18 million. Gene Siskel called it the only halfway decent video game movie. Hey, backhanded compliments are still compliments, okay? The next natural step? Replace the director, recast the roles, and make a much worse film, apparently. It was a critical and financial failure, and the third film was scrapped. Shame. I heard some people were going to beat each other up in that one. Number 34. Gekijoban Meiji Tokyo Renka Yumihara no Serenade 2015 and Oh Christ. Geki Joban Meiji Tokyo Renka Hana Kagami no Fantasia 2016. I can only apologise. Meiji Tokyo Renka was a visual novel that became popular enough upon its release to warrant a film adaptation, which went into full production almost immediately. It was well enough received, but did not do well at the box office, leading to its sequel getting a one-day-only theatrical release. It is worth mentioning that a live-action Meiji Tokyo Renka film was released in 2019, but it's unclear whether or not it made it to theatres. That is to say, it's unclear to me, a British boy who didn't know this series existed prior to recording this sentence. It's probably clear enough to people in Japan whether they watched it in a theatre or on their couch. Number 33. Need for Speed 2014. Basing a movie on a racing game is a filmmaker's way of saying, I wish I were allowed to make The Fast and the Furious. Buying the rights to Need for Speed does bring brand recognition, but giving free money to EA is not the sort of behaviour we should condone. Anyway, fans of the games were no doubt thrilled to see all of their favourite characters up on the big screen, such as cars and roads. It's nice enough to see Aaron Paul at least. Perhaps he wouldn't be driving so fast if he weren't Breaking Bad. Braking like with a car when you want to stop, and bad as in poorly. You'll laugh tomorrow. Number 32. CLANNAD 2007. CLANNAD got spin-offs and adaptations in manga, anime, radio dramas, and obviously, film. Visual novels, in theory, should make for easy film adaptations. Rather than having to turn gameplay-driven experiences into cinematic ones, the filmmakers can focus on the characters, the setting, and the story. In the case of CLANNAD, that's just what Toei did. Obviously, the branching plot had to go, so the story was reinterpreted with female lead Nagisa Furukawa being given the focus. Fans are split, many preferring the anime, but the film does have its defenders. Notably, it was also the final film directed by Osamu Dezaki, responsible for classics dating all the way back to Astro Boy before his death. Number 31. Oh man. Pretty Rhythm All-Star Selection Prism Show Best 10 2014, Gekijo Ban Prepara Minna Atsumare Prism Tours 2015, King of Prism by Pretty Rhythm 2016, Prepara Minna no Akugare Let's Go Prepara 2016, King of Prism Pride of the Hero 2017, Gekijo Ban Prepara and Kirato Pre-chan Kira Memorial Live 2018, and King of Prism Shiny 7 Stars 2019. I'm so sorry. Pretty Rhythm is a series of Japanese rhythm games released primarily in arcades. The machines are compatible with physical prism stones, unlocking costumes for the characters. The first film was made to spotlight 10 performances from the Pretty Rhythm anime series, but it did get a theatrical release, so we decided to include it. We didn't decide to watch it, but we did decide to include it. Several screenings of the film even featured live performances by Prismi, the band that hosted segments of the Pretty Rhythm anime. If only the Super Mario Bros. Film had a screening at which Captain Lou Albano implored live audiences to do the Mario. It could have been a hit. Number 30. Street Fighter II: The Animated Movie, 1994. While it's the unbeatable stupidity of the live-action film that will live on in the public consciousness, Street Fighter also got an animated movie that was released just a few months prior. It was produced for a fraction of the cost and earned a Rotten Tomatoes rating that was an incredible 7 times higher, that being 78%. Critics and fans were pleased, with the main complaints coming from the changes made for the Western release, which added an ill-fitting grunge soundtrack for some reason. That's since been rectified in later versions. It was so well received that elements of the film were canonized by later games in the series. Very few of these films can say that, thank Christ. Number 29. Assassin's Creed 2016. One of the best things about Assassin's Creed is that installments can take place anywhere at any point in history. Even so, I think it's safe to say nobody expected the Spanish Inquisition. Ubisoft was reportedly excited for the film's desire to introduce its own elements and ideas into the lore, with the intention of eventually tying the worlds of the games and the films together, creating one large, multimedia canon for angry people to fight about on the internet. The film reviewed poorly though, with an 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, and lost somewhere around $100 million, so the company decided maybe Assassin's Creed should just be games. It's difficult to disagree. Number 28. Dragon Quest: Your Story, 2019. Dragon Quest could have translated easily into a standalone film with a unique story. Familiar enemies, names, and systems recur in the series, but almost every game features an enclosed continuity anyway. That makes Your Story's decision to specifically adapt one of the games a bit odd. More odd is that this 2019 film adapted a game from 1992. Then again, a lawsuit alleges that they adapted Saori Kumi's novelization of that game as much as they adapted the game itself, but didn't give her credit. It's a messy situation and a messy film, with fan opinion quite split. We think they should be happy though, as we've seen things could be much worse. Number 27. Lara Croft Tomb Raider 2001 and Lara Croft Tomb Raider The Cradle of Life 2003. 2001's Tomb Raider was received about as well as any video game adaptation was received at the time. That is to say, critics begged someone to open a window, but the praise for Angelina Jolie in the title role was all but universal. She was an excellent fit, and the biggest complaint was that she didn't get a better film. 2 years later, she did, with The Cradle of Life, which was better reviewed but didn't perform nearly as well. Distributor Paramount blamed the financial failure of the second film on the fact that Tomb Raider games weren't good anymore. Come see our movie based on terrible games didn't make for a winning marketing strategy, which is not surprising. Number 26. Resident Evil 2002, Resident Evil Apocalypse 2004, Resident Evil Extinction 2007, Resident Evil Afterlife 2010, Resident Evil Retribution 2012, and Resident Evil The Final Chapter 2017. Paul W.S. Anderson's Resident Evil series includes a whopping 6 films. Quite impressive, considering nobody liked them. Much of the criticism went to protagonist Alice, played by Mila Jovovich. Not because she was bad, but because focusing on her relegated actual Resident Evil characters to cameos. Oh, and they were action films instead of horror films, a decision that must have been made to ensure they'd please nobody. The worst part? George Romero wrote a script that was never used. Yeah, the Godfather of zombie cinema adapted the Godfather of zombie games and we never got to see it. But don't worry, we might stumble across Resident Evil again a bit later on.
Number 25. Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within 2001. Many of the films on this list are bad and performed poorly, but only one of the films on this list almost destroyed the company that made the games it was based on. The Spirits Within is far superior to most of the Drek in this list, but the problem was one of expectation. Protagonist Aki Ross was the world's first digital actress, intended to star in other films after this one. She was even given a press tour, which of course included showing her posing for Maxim. The movie flopped, however, and did so notably enough that Enix put the brakes on its merger with Square, understandably not enthusiastic about hitching up with a company that had just blown $140 million on a vanity film. Number 24. Oh god. Yokai Watch the Movie 2014. Yokai Watch Emadio to Itsu... You know what, just the Yokai Watch series. Game development is a business, and we can't fault developer Level 5 for wanting a single franchise that could bring a steady stream of income. And that's exactly what they were looking for when they developed Yokai Watch, a series with strong parallels to both Pokemon and Shin Megami Tensei. Of course, it also had a film series, within which 5 movies have seen a theatrical release. If it seems a bit cynical to design a franchise for its profitability, it's worth noting that the first film has an incredible 80% average on Rotten Tomatoes. The intention may well have been to make lots of money, but I say let Level 5 be if they're going to be making stuff that's worth every penny. Number 23. Nico Atsume no Ie 2017. Nico Atsume Kitty Collector is a... Well, I can't think of the genre, but it's one of those mobile games that revolves around buying things, which, come to think of it, doesn't really narrow it down at all, does it? Anyway, you decorate a small area in order to attract stray cats, and then you keep doing that. You just keep doing that. That's not the most riveting concept for a feature film, which is probably why Nico Atsume no Ie, I think, is instead about a struggling novelist. Quite how attracting throngs of stray cats to his home restores his ability to write is beyond us, but then again, just thinking about the concept has allowed us to write this entry, so maybe there's something to this, after all. Number 22. The Idolmaster movie Kagayaki no Mukagawa 2014. Idolmaster is a series of simulation games about training up-and-coming young idols for stardom. A concept such as this can cover just about any kind of story, and indeed you'll find just about every kind of story in the games. The film, translating as the Idolmaster movie To the Glittering Other Side in English, explores both halves of the idol equation, with well-established and successful idols being given anxious new proteges, still navigating the quirks of fame. Is this for everybody? No. Is it for me? Also no, but the film won a number of major anime awards. Compared to the Razzies most of these movies went home with, we think that's pretty good going. Number 21. Oh my god, all of the Pokemon movies, I am not reading that. If you'd like us to rank every Pokemon movie from worst to best, please let us know in the comments. There are certainly enough of them. We aren't going to do it, mind you, but you'll feel better for having voiced your feelings. The films themselves more or less run the full gamut in terms of critical reception. The lowest Rotten Tomatoes score goes to 1998's Pokemon the First Movie, which we are reliably informed was the first movie, with only 15%. The highest goes to 2018's Pokemon the Movie The Power of Us, which earned 60%. That in itself doesn't sound great, but for a video game movie that practically makes it Seven Samurai, and there's a very good chance that you grew up with and enjoyed at least one of these, and you can't really say fairer than that, can you? Number 20. Air, 2005. Released in 2000, adult visual novel Air was the year's best-selling PC game in Japan. It found a wider audience with ports for the Dreamcast and PS2, stripped of its explicit sex scenes, of course. Both versions attracted a dedicated following either way though, with Air later receiving an anime adaptation, and the year after that, a feature film. Compared to the anime, the movie focused more directly on the romantic relationships between the protagonist and a character from one of the arcs in the visual novel. This was seen as a far better approach, as the anime has been described as a mo-fest, which, to be fair, you might prefer. We're not here to judge. Number 19. Super Mario Bros. Peach Himekyu Shutsu Daisakusen, 1986. This film, whose title translates to Super Mario Bros. The Great Mission to Rescue Princess Peach, managed to do justice to the source material a full 7 years before the live-action film made it seem like it couldn't ever be done at all. Is the movie great? No, but it's recognisably Mario at least. It's less recognisably Luigi, who the animators seem to think wore yellow and blue, but looking at the bulk of this list, we'll take what we can get, to be honest. The plot centres around the bowl-scrubbing brothers rescuing Princess Peach from Bowser, which you probably could have guessed. It ends, though, with a demoralised Bowser working in a grocery store, and I bet you didn't see that coming, you smartass. Number 18. Fate/Stay Night, Heaven's Feel 1, Presage Flower, 2017, and Fate/Stay Night, Heaven's Feel 2, Lost Butterfly, 2019. This is getting really silly. As with Fate/Stay Night, I really hope I'm saying that properly, Unlimited Blade Works, Heaven's Feel devotes itself to a single arc in the visual novel. This film, however, learned from that film's limitations. This time, the story was given the space of a trilogy, preventing crucial information from being lost and making the story far easier to follow. Critics and fans enjoyed it, at least they have so far. The COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in a delay to the third and final film, unfortunately. It's important for a story we love to stick the landing, of course, so this entry could end up moving up or down on the list, depending on how that third installment finally ends up being. At the time of writing, however, the Heaven's Feel films have given fans everything they wanted, and that is worth celebrating. Number 17. Warcraft, 2016. Few games on this list can be said to have had anywhere near the cultural impact of World of Warcraft. For that reason, we shouldn't be too surprised that despite being at number 17 in the list, this is the highest grossing video game movie of all time. Having Duncan Jones, an actual good director of good films, behind the project certainly didn't hurt, but overall, the critics considered his talents wasted here. Warcraft holds a score of only 28% on Rotten Tomatoes, with most of the criticism going towards the fact that the film seems to lay the groundwork for a franchise that isn't coming. It may have earned more money, but Warcraft certainly didn't have more staying power than anything else on this list. Number 16, Yakuza Like a Dragon, 2007. Described at the time as basically being Shenmue but fun, Yakuza was an early indication that Sega might indeed find success in the company's post-console era. It also clearly lent itself well to a film, where criminal underworlds were already the foundation of countless beloved classics. Critics and fans were impressed by, well, just a video game movie being plain decent, to be honest. Like a Dragon retained the wryness of the game and its seductive violence. It also told a story that was familiar to fans, but which stood on its own for those who hadn't played the game. In short, it was a genuinely good movie that just happened to be based on a game. See? It's not that difficult.
Number 15. Corpse Party, 2015, and Corpse Party Book of Shadows, 2016. Corpse Party is the little RPG maker project that could. It's about school children playing a parlor game that sends them on a hellish journey through a warped version of their world. That's similar to the plot of the first Persona game, but it was a case of parallel invention. Both games released in 1996, with Corpse Party debuting a few months earlier. Light on gameplay, Corpse Party was heavy on character, atmosphere, and grotesquerie. It lent itself well to adaptation and has seen manga and anime tie-ins. The game and its sequel also got live-action versions. Corpse Party is a disarming experience, and it's received better adaptations in all media than nearly anything on this list. Number 14. Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time, 2010. The film may not come up in conversation much anymore, but Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is actually the 4th highest grossing video game movie ever, though we'd be hard-pressed to tell you why. The game, to be clear, is still quite good. It's one of the better video game reboots, indirectly gave the world Assassin's Creed, and holds up well. The film, however, despite being a box office success, didn't nearly have that degree of impact. Plans to turn it into a franchise fell apart, and star Jake Gyllenhaal has said that the only thing he learned from doing the movie was to be more careful about the roles he accepted. If only he could rewind time. Number 13. The Angry Birds Movie, 2016, and The Angry Birds Movie 2, 2019. Your familiarity with Angry Birds primarily comes down to how much time you spent on the toilet in 2009. The idea was simple. You would take a number of differently coloured birds and fling them at pigs. Then afterwards, maybe you'd play Angry Birds. Okay. The game was a genuine hit, leading to merchandising, an animated series, and eventually a film. It stands at 43% on Rotten Tomatoes with a comparable audience score. Its sequel, however, was received much better, with 73% from critics and 84% from audiences. Impressive results for movies based on a game about moving your finger from side to side. Number 12. Animal Crossing: The Movie, 2006. There are few things more relaxing than playing Animal Crossing, but with Animal Crossing: The Movie, you can even relax your thumbs. Great pains were taken to ensure that the film would feel true to the Animal Crossing spirit, with some of the game's staff working on the movie, including series composer Kazumi Totaka. And it worked. The story of 11-year-old Ai finding her place in a village of animals is far from the most exciting thing on this list, but it might be the most charming. It performed so well with Japanese fans that Nintendo was inspired to make the very clear announcement that they had no plans to bring it to the West. Thanks? Number 11. Gekijoban 0, 2014. Fatal Frame is a series of horror games in which you damage ghosts by photographing them. It's basically a version of Pokemon Snap that makes you poo yourself. The first game was designed by a team pulling inspiration from the scariest films they could find. It ended up being so scary, they were disappointed that so many players were too frightened to finish it. It was loosely novelized as Fatal Frame: A Curse Affecting Only Girls, and was adapted from there into a scary movie of its own. The film was praised for its examination of forbidden same-sex relationships and has since become a celebrated horror movie in its own right. Number 10. Tomb Raider, 2018. With a reimagined Lara Croft getting a series of new video game adventures, it made sense for films to get a reimagined Lara Croft as well. This was Alicia Vikander, who suited the character from the rebooted games at least as well as Angelina Jolie did with the original. Criticisms were similar to those levied at the game itself, with the excessive violence being seen as unnecessary and the speed with which Lara recovers from it being seen as unrealistic. These are things that could easily be ironed out for a sequel, though that dang C virus has sidelined production. Hopefully we'll still get one. Like the rebooted games, the film was much better than anyone expected. Number 9. Professor Layton and the Eternal Diva, 2009. Could Professor Layton end up being the next big series of video game movies? The crew that worked on this one certainly thinks so, saying they plan to release a new Layton film every winter. Of course, they said this in 2009 and we still haven't gotten a sequel, so let's not hold our breath. The movie isn't half bad. Fans of the brain-teasing games will be well served by the returning voice actors and familiar style of animation. It's a standalone yet canon story about Layton and his assistant Luke, allowing it to appeal to both those familiar with the games and those who just want to watch an animated Sherlock Holmes who ingests marginally less opium.
Number 8. Bayonetta Bloody Fate, 2013. If there's one thing you need to absolutely nail when adapting Bayonetta into another medium, it's the style. The animators behind Bloody Fate understood that, and the result is an extremely watchable retelling of Bayonetta's first adventure. The film features most of the game's English voice cast reprising their roles. The original release of the game in Japan, though, only featured English voices, so for the film, a Japanese cast was assembled from scratch. Their performances were so well received that Bloody Fate's Japanese movie cast was brought in for both Bayonetta 2 and to at last record a Japanese voice track for a re-release of the first game. Now that is a high and well-deserved honour. Number 7. Sonic the Hedgehog 2020. As we all know, when the Sonic the Hedgehog movie was revealed, it didn't have many defenders. From the character's glory days being decades in the past, to the hideous design of the character, to the complete lack of necessity of a film at all, there was no expectation that it would ever succeed. And yet, it did. The negativity surrounding the film turned cautiously positive when the filmmakers took concerns to heart, re-editing it to feature a much less terrifying main character. Did that make the film better than it would have been otherwise? Who's to say, but it certainly made it more successful at the box office. Now don't let anybody tell you that complaining on the internet accomplishes nothing. Number 6. Rampage 2018. Given that the video game Rampage was itself based on some of the most famous monster movies in history, including heavy hitters such as Godzilla and King Kong, one might expect it to translate back into a film fairly easily. And then one might watch Rampage and never have those expectations ever again. Honestly though, it's not a terrible film. I found it a massive guilty pleasure the first time I saw it, but it's just kind of pointless and nowhere near as fun as a movie about big monsters smashing through things should actually be. Interestingly, when it was released in 2018, it was the highest rated video game movie in the history of Rotten Tomatoes. That's still only a 52% average, but you know, progress I suppose. Number 5. Resident Evil Degeneration 2008, Resident Evil Damnation 2012, and Resident Evil Vendetta 2017. Okay, hear us out, we've got a concept here. Resident Evil, but featuring actual characters from the games. It's just crazy enough to actually work! Don't get us wrong, the 3 CGI Resi movies aren't masterpieces, but they're true to the spirit of the series, alternating between genuine horror and over-the-top action in a way that works quite well. The characters, often with returning voice actors, are recognisable from the games, and we get to see what a number of them have done with their lives since we last encountered them. Everything looks and feels like the Resi movie we should have gotten in the first place. All it took was giving the franchise to people who knew what they were doing. It's kind of obvious, really. Number 4. Detention 2019. Detention is an atmospheric horror game that you should absolutely play unless you're a big baby. It's really quite good, and so is the 2019 movie, which did exceptional business for a Taiwanese production and won a number of film awards. It draws its inspiration from real-life horror, the period of politically sanctioned censorship, incarceration, and execution known as the White Terror. It goes without saying that the game and its adaptation are banned in Hong Kong. It's a regrettable period of history that neither the game nor the film wish to slip from memory. Certainly from a social standpoint, Detention is the most important movie on this list. Number 3. Ace Attorney 2012. Capcom's Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney games are beloved, not least for their distinctive visual style and over-the-top take on the judicial system. Turning it into a live-action film instead of an animation true to the style of the original games was therefore a very risky prospect, and yet, miraculously, it paid off. The silliness of the series was retained shockingly well, due mainly to a hammy cast that fully leaned into the ridiculousness while taking it just seriously enough. Reviews from Kotaku and Nintendo Life have called it the best video game movie yet, with similarly high praise coming from IGN, Destructoid, and IndieWire. Is it deserving of that praise though? Well, I have no objection. Number 2. Persona 3 the Movie Number 1, Spring of Birth 2013. Persona 3 the Movie Number 2, Midsummer Night's Dream 2014. Persona 3 the Movie Number 3, Falling Down 2015. And Persona 3 the Movie Number 4, Winter of Rebirth 2016. Persona 3 is often cited as having the best story in the video game series. Another game may contain your waifu or husbando or moving on, but Persona 3's grappling with the inevitability of death makes for a gripping and unforgettable narrative. Wisely, the cinematic adaptation, a quadrilogy of animated features with the longest titles in the world, is faithful to the game in all of the ways fans could have wished. It takes the basic structure of Persona 3, reduces the number of battles to fit the pace of a movie, and finds new ways to fill the gaps that have been left by the removal of gameplay. You know, when I say it out loud like that, it almost seems like an obvious approach for making all video game movies.
Number 1. Detective Pikachu, 2019. This probably isn't a surprise to anyone. Detective Pikachu was heralded by a number of outlets as being the best video game film of all time, and whether or not you agree, it's impossible not to see the reason it would appeal to so many. It's adorable, it's funny, and it presents enough of a twist on our expectations of Pokemon that it appeals to fans without limiting its appeal to just fans.
Of course, it's easy to overlook the fact that Detective Pikachu is not an invention of the film. Arriving late in the life of the 3DS, the Detective Pikachu game was easy to miss, and that makes this a rare case of a film raising the profile of the game on which it was based, rather than the other way round.
It is also the highest rated live-action video game movie on Rotten Tomatoes, with a nice 69%. Okay, not outstanding, but it's all relative. It fared a bit worse on Metacritic, where it is the second highest rated live-action video game movie. It's right behind, let me just check, Mortal Kombat? Good lord, people make me sick.
And there we go, that is every video game movie ranked from worst to best. But how many of them have you seen? If the number is greater than 4, we suggest you see a doctor immediately. Did you think Detective Pikachu would be number 1? Do you wish Hitman was number 47, not number 48? That was pretty annoying, to be honest. And when Triple Jump Pictures releases its adaptation of Deadly Premonition, which of us should play Francis York Morgan?
As always, we hope you enjoyed the video. Share it with your friends, even if it's only to illustrate just how unforgivably wrong we are. Also, if you have any suggestions for other Every X ranked from worst to best videos, let us know. We've ranked almost everything in existence, but surely something is left.
You can follow us at Triple Jump on Twitter here, and while you're at it, why not support the things you enjoy by having a look at our Patreon.
Finally, don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. I'm Ben.
And I'm Peter from Triple Jump, and thanks for watching.